"You tricked him," Eleanor hissed, her voice a low, venomous thing in the pristine quiet of my sunroom. The words hung in the air, sharp and glittering as shattered glass. "All these years, you played the part of the perfect wife, but you were just waiting to take everything from him, from us." Her two other children, David's siblings, stood behind her like stone gargoyles, their faces a mixture of pity and contempt. My husband, my soon-to-be ex-husband David, wouldn't meet my eye. He just stared at a particularly lush fern in the corner, as if it held the secrets to the universe. My heart wasn't breaking. It had already been pulverized into dust weeks ago. This was just them, sweeping up the ashes. I said nothing. I simply walked over to the mahogany desk, unlocked a drawer, and pulled out a single, leather-bound folder. I opened it to a bookmarked page and slid it across the polished surface of the table toward her. Her eyes, narrowed in suspicion, scanned the first few lines. Then she stopped. Her perfectly made-up face, a mask of righteous fury moments before, seemed to crumble from the inside out. The color drained away, leaving a pasty, slack-jawed void. "What? What is this?" she stammered. "That," I said, my voice eerily calm, "is the clause you should have read 22 years ago. Before I was Catherine Sterling, wife of David and daughter-in-law to the formidable Eleanor, I was just Kate Miller, a girl with a knack for code and a dream built in a dusty garage. I wasn't born into money. I earned it. My 20s were a blur of all-nighters, cheap coffee, and the exhilarating terror of payroll. I'd built a boutique software company from the ground up, a niche little thing that streamlined logistics for artisan food producers. It was my baby, my passion, my identity. By 30, I was a success by any measure. I was also lonely. Then I met David at a charity gala I'd been dragged to. He was charming, handsome, and came from a family whose name was etched onto museum wings and university libraries. They had old money, the kind that whispers instead of shouts. I was new money, the kind that still remembered the price of milk. He was fascinated by my drive, and I was charmed by his easy grace. He didn't seem to care that my pedigree was a state school, and my father was a high school history teacher. He loved me. When he proposed, Eleanor sat me down for a chat. It was a velvet-gloved interrogation about my intentions. She suggested a prenuptial agreement. "To protect David, you understand," she'd said, smiling a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Our family has legacies." I agreed instantly, much to her surprise. My own lawyer, a sharp woman named Anya, drafted a document that was reciprocal. It protected his assets, and it protected mine. At the time, my burgeoning company was valued far higher than David's trust fund inheritance. He was a partner at an architecture firm, successful in his own right, but he didn't have the kind of liquid capital I did. David signed it without a second glance. "It's just a piece of paper, Kate," he'd laughed. "You and me, we're forever." So I began the slow, imperceptible process of becoming a Sterling. I sold a majority share in my company, stepping back from the CEO role to a board position. The influx of cash was staggering. David and his family convinced me it was for the best. "You can focus on us now," David had said. "We can build a real life, a family." I wanted that. I desperately wanted a family. So I poured my energy, my time, and yes, my money into our life. I bought the sprawling Connecticut home. I funded the children's private school education and their summers in Europe. I bankrolled David's dream of starting his own boutique firm, which was more of a passion project than a profitable venture. I managed the investments, my investments, that paid for the ski house in Aspen and the yacht club membership. I became the perfect hostess, the supportive wife, the woman behind the man. My past as a tech CEO became a quaint little anecdote, a footnote in the grand story of the Sterling family. I didn't mind. I thought I was building a legacy of my own, a happy, thriving family. I thought we were a team. The shift was so gradual, I almost didn't notice it. It started with small things, little paper cuts to the soul. At family gatherings, when someone new was introduced, Eleanor would say, "This is our son, David, the architect, and his wife, Catherine." No mention of my past, my accomplishments. I was an accessory. Then came the family photos. During a big anniversary party for Eleanor and her husband, the photographer was wrangling everyone. "Okay, now one with just the Sterling bloodline," Eleanor called out cheerfully. I, along with another spouse, stepped aside, smiling a fixed, polite smile as the camera flashed. I felt a pang of otherness, a cold little stone in my gut. Financial conversations began to happen in hushed tones when I entered the room. They'd be discussing a major renovation on the Aspen house, a project my portfolio was funding, and the talk would abruptly shift to the weather. When I'd ask David about it later, he'd be dismissive. "Oh, it's just family stuff, darling. Don't worry your pretty head about it. The accounts are fine, aren't they?" He made me feel like an outsider peeking at the bank statements, not the person who had generated the wealth in the first place. The true turning point was a family trip to Tuscany to celebrate David's 50th birthday. I'd planned and paid for the entire thing, a magnificent villa with sweeping views of the countryside. But when we arrived, David's sister, Clara, announced she'd rearranged the rooms. "Mom and Dad need the master suite, of course," she said. "And David, you're in the second master. We put you, Catherine, in the lovely little room in the guest wing. It's cozier for you." The room was small, with a lumpy single bed and a window that faced a brick wall. The main house buzzed with laughter and the clinking of glasses every night, while I felt a mile away. One evening, I tried to suggest a visit to a small historic vineyard I'd read about. Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, no, dear. We've decided we're going to the designer outlet in Florence. David needs some new linen shirts." My opinion was irrelevant. I was the tour operator and the bank, not a participant. I spent an afternoon by myself, walking through an olive grove, the Tuscan sun warm on my skin, and felt a profound, aching loneliness that had nothing to do with being alone. It was the loneliness of being invisible in a crowd of people who were supposed to be my family. The end came not with a bang, but with a quiet, devastatingly polite conversation. It was a Tuesday. I had just come back from a charity board meeting, feeling energized. David was in the study, a room I'd designed for him with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a view of the gardens. He didn't get up when I came in. He was holding a glass of scotch, the ice clinking softly as he swirled it. "We need to talk," he said, his voice flat. My stomach plummeted. I'd seen the signs, of course. The late nights he claimed were client dinners, the password on his phone that had suddenly appeared, the emotional distance that had become a chasm. But I had allowed myself to believe it was a phase, a midlife crisis we could weather. "I'm not happy, Kate," he said, still not looking at me. "I haven't been for a long time." He paused, taking a sip of his drink. "I've met someone." The words were so cliché, so expected, yet they landed with the force of a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs. I sank into the leather armchair opposite him, my purse sliding from my lap onto the floor. "Her name is Tiffany," he continued, as if discussing a business transaction. She's full of life. She makes me feel young again." I thought of the life I had given up for him, the company I had built, the 2 decades I had dedicated to our family, to his comfort, to his dreams, all erased for a woman named Tiffany. "I'm moving out," he said. "I've already packed a few things. I'll send for the rest." He stood up then, placing the empty glass on the mantelpiece. He walked to the door and paused, his hand on the knob. For a single, foolish second, I thought he might turn around, might show an ounce of remorse. He didn't. "My mother will be in touch," he said, and then he was gone. The silence he left behind was absolute. It was heavier than any sound. The next day, the calls started, not from friends offering support, but from his family, offering judgment. His sister Clara was first. "Catherine, I am so disappointed in you. How could you let this happen? You just stopped trying. David deserves to be happy." Then came Eleanor. Her voice was cold steel. "You were never the right fit for him, you know? He needed someone with more vibrancy. You smothered him with all this being the life I had single-handedly funded. No one asked how I was. No one cared. I wasn't a person who was hurting. I was an obstacle to David's newfound happiness. I was utterly, completely, and finally alone. For a week, I drifted through my own home like a ghost. The silence David left behind was now filled with the echoes of accusations from his family. I stopped answering the phone. I ate nothing but toast and drank bitter black coffee, staring out at the manicured gardens that suddenly felt like a gilded cage. One afternoon, unable to bear the oppressive quiet, I drove into the nearby town. I had no destination. I just needed to be around the low hum of other people's lives. I ended up in a small, independent bookstore with a cafe in the back. I ordered a tea I didn't want and sat at a wobbly little table trying to read a book whose words swam before my eyes. And then it happened. A wave of grief so immense, so total, washed over me. A sob escaped my lips, a raw, ugly sound. I clapped a hand over my mouth, mortified, as tears began to stream down my face. "Rough day, honey?" I looked up to see a woman at the next table. She was probably in her late 60s, with kind, crinkly eyes and a cascade of unruly silver hair tucked into a messy bun. She wasn't offering pity. Her tone was one of simple, shared experience. I could only nod, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. She pushed a small packet of tissues across the space between our tables. "I've been there," she said softly. "My Henry, God rest his soul, didn't leave me for another woman. He left me for a 28-foot sailboat and the Gulf of Mexico. Said he needed to find the horizon. Men can be fools at any age." Her frankness was disarming. I managed a watery chuckle. "My husband found his horizon in a woman named Tiffany," I whispered. She nodded sagely. "There's always a Tiffany, or a sailboat, or a sports car." She leaned forward slightly. "Let me tell you something a wise woman told me when my world fell apart. You don't have to be strong right now. You don't have to figure it all out. Right now, you just have to breathe. And when you're done crying, you drink your tea. And maybe you buy a book you'll never read. It's enough." We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Her name was Maria. She owned a small pottery studio down the street. She didn't ask for details of my story. She didn't offer advice on what I should do next. She just shared her space, her quiet empathy, and her tissues. For the first time in weeks, I felt seen not as David's wife or a woman scorned, but just as a person in pain. When I left the cafe, the world didn't seem magically fixed. The pain was still there, a heavy weight in my chest, but for the first time, it felt bearable. Maria's simple act of kindness had given me a tiny, essential gift, a sliver of hope, and the permission to simply be broken for a little while. The encounter with Maria was a crack of light in a dark room. It didn't solve my problems, but it reminded me that I was a person, separate from the Sterling family drama. The next morning, instead of staring at the walls, I picked up the phone and called Anya, the lawyer who had drafted my prenup more than 2 decades ago. She was a senior partner at a top firm in New York now, but she took my call immediately. "Catherine," she said, her voice as crisp and no-nonsense as I remembered. "I was wondering when you'd call. I read about David's new venture in a gossip column." I explained the situation. David leaving, the family's accusations, their clear expectation that a settlement would involve me gracefully handing over half of our assets so he could start his new life with Tiffany. There was a pause on the line, and then Anya let out a short, dry laugh. "Oh, Catherine, they really have no idea, do they? Did you ever tell them the specifics of what we drafted?" "No," I admitted. David signed it without reading. It felt indelicate to bring it up. I just let them believe it was a standard agreement to protect his family's name. "Well," Anya said, and I could hear her shuffling papers, "their ignorance is about to become very, very expensive for them. I'm looking at it now, Clause 4B. We called it the Inception Asset Clause. It's ironclad." She began to read, and with every word I felt 20 years of suppressed identity flooding back into me. The clause stipulated that any assets owned by either party before the marriage, including businesses, stocks, and property, would remain their sole and separate property. Crucially, it also stipulated that any growth, profit, or subsequent investments derived directly from those initial assets would also be considered separate property. "Catherine," Anya explained, "you sold your company for a fortune after you were married, but the company itself was a pre-marital asset. You then used that money, and only that money, to buy the Connecticut house, the Aspen house, and to fund the entire investment portfolio that has supported your lifestyle for 22 years. David's salary as an architect barely covered the property taxes on the main house. The implications settled over me, slow and powerful. So what does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It means," Anya said, her voice ringing with satisfaction, "that the house you're sitting in is yours. The house in Aspen is yours. The art on the walls is yours. The stock portfolio is yours. All of it. According to this document, what David is entitled to is half of the joint checking account, which currently has a balance of $17,000, and his own pension from his firm. That's it. A wave of vertigo washed over me. For years, I had been treated as the beneficiary of their lifestyle, when in reality, I had been its sole benefactor. The humiliation I had felt, the slights, the condescension, it all replayed in my mind, but now in a different light. They weren't just being unkind, they were being ungrateful to the highest degree. "What do you want to do, Catherine?" Anya asked gently. The old Kate, the accommodating wife, would have offered a generous settlement to keep the peace, but she was gone. She had died in that lonely Tuscan guest room. In her place was a woman who remembered what it was like to build something from nothing. "I want to enforce it," I said, my voice clear and steady. To the letter. The aftermath was not a dramatic courtroom battle. It was a series of quiet, devastating legal maneuvers executed by Anya with surgical precision. David's lawyer, a crony of his father's, blustered and threatened, but faced with the ironclad prenup, he had no ground to stand on. The first official letter from Anya's office, outlining the division of assets according to Clause 4B, was met with stunned silence. Then came the panicked phone call from David. It was the first time he'd called me since he left. His voice, usually so smooth and confident, was high-pitched and strained. "Kate, this is insane," he sputtered. "Anya must have made a mistake. The houses, the investments, that's our life, that's our money." "No, David," I said calmly, picturing him in whatever bachelor apartment he'd rented. "It was my money. It always was. You just never bothered to ask." I heard him take a shaky breath. "But what am I supposed to do? Tiffany and I were looking at places. I can't afford anything on my salary alone." "That sounds like a personal problem, David," I said, and for the first time, I felt not pain, but a vast, cool distance. I hung up. The ripple effects were swift. I received word through a mutual acquaintance that Eleanor had to cancel the family's annual chartered yacht trip through the Greek Isles. Clara, David's sister, apparently had a small meltdown when she learned that the family ski house in Aspen was being put on the market by its sole owner, me. She had already promised a ski week to her husband's business partners. Eleanor tried to call me once. I let it go to voicemail. The message was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation, swinging from tearful pleas about all the years we shared to bitter accusations that I was destroying her son's future out of spite. She never once acknowledged the source of the wealth she had so enjoyed. To her, it had simply been her due. The most satisfying piece of news came via a text from an old friend who still moved in those circles. Tiffany, the vibrant woman who was full of life, had apparently departed. Her love for David, it turned out, was directly proportional to his net worth. He was now living in a modest 2-bedroom condo, driving a 5-year-old sedan, and according to my friend, looked deflated. I felt no glee, no triumphant joy. Instead, I felt a profound sense of order. The world had righted itself. They hadn't loved me. They had loved what I provided. When the provisions were gone, so was the pretense of affection. From a distance, I watched the life they had built on my foundation crumble, not because of my revenge, but because it had never been real in the first place. With the legal battle behind me and the Aspen house sold, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. The sprawling Connecticut home, once a symbol of my gilded cage, now felt too large, too full of ghosts. I sold it and bought a beautiful, light-filled apartment in the city, with a terrace that overlooked the park. It was mine, in a way the house had never been. The first thing I did was re-engage with the part of myself I had put on a shelf for 22 years, the builder, the creator. I didn't want to go back into tech. That life was over. Instead, I enrolled in an advanced architecture and design course at Columbia. I had spent 2 decades watching David sketch buildings. Now, I wanted to understand the bones of them myself. I, who had been told my opinions on vineyards were irrelevant, was now debating the merits of brutalist architecture with professors and students half my age. It was terrifying and exhilarating. My social life transformed. I drifted away from the country club set, the women whose conversations revolved around their husbands' bonuses and summer plans in the Hamptons. My new friends were from my class, a retired surgeon who was now a passionate sculptor, a young graphic designer with a wicked sense of humor, and my professor, a brilliant woman in her 70s who became a mentor. We talked about art, about politics, about books. No one asked me who my husband was. They wanted to know what I thought. I started traveling again, but this time it was for me. I spent a month in Japan, not staying in five-star hotels, but in traditional ryokans, studying garden design and the art of kintsugi, the Japanese practice of repairing broken pottery with gold, embracing the cracks as part of the object's history. The metaphor was not lost on me. I rediscovered small joys, the pleasure of a quiet morning with the newspaper and a perfect cappuccino, the thrill of getting lost in a new neighborhood. I took up photography, finding beauty in the city's hidden corners, a splash of graffiti on an old brick wall, the way the light hit the Chrysler Building at dawn. My life wasn't loud or flashy anymore. It was quiet, it was intentional, and it was entirely my own. I was no longer a supporting character in someone else's story. I was the protagonist of mine, and I was finally writing my own script. About a year into my new life, as I was sketching a design for a community library project for my course, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, assuming it was more fallout from my old life, but something made me look. It was from my grandson, Leo. He was 19 now, a freshman in college, and the one member of the family whose absence had left a genuine ache in my heart. I hadn't seen him since the day David walked out. The message read, "Grandma Kate? It's Leo. I got your number from Mom's old Christmas card list. I hope this is okay. I've been wanting to write for a long time, but I didn't know what to say. I'm at school now, and I'm seeing things differently. I hear Dad on the phone with Grandma Eleanor sometimes. All they do is complain. They talk about money and what they've lost. They never talk about you, the person. They never say they miss you, but I do. I miss the stories you used to read to me about ancient Rome. I miss how you taught me to use a camera. I remember that trip to Tuscany, and I remember you wanted to go see that old vineyard and everyone ignored you. I was just a kid, but I remember. And I'm sorry. What they did was wrong. Dad is miserable, and he's trying to pretend he isn't. Grandma Eleanor is just bitter. It's like they're all trapped in a story where they're the victims, and they can't see that they broke everything themselves. I guess I just wanted to say that I know you were the one holding it all together. You were the good part, and I miss my grandma. I hope you're happy. Leo." I read the message 3 times, my hand pressed to my chest. The carefully constructed walls I had built around my heart, the calm and collected exterior I had perfected, suddenly felt fragile. Tears welled in my eyes, but these were not the tears of grief I had shed in the bookstore. These were tears of a different kind, a complex cocktail of sorrow for the boy who had to witness his family's ugliness, and a profound, bone-deep relief. Someone had seen, someone understood. It wasn't just about the money or the prenup. It was about the erasure of a person, and this boy, on the cusp of manhood, had seen it clearly. He hadn't just lost a lifestyle, he had lost his grandmother. And he was reaching across the wreckage to find her. The message was a crack in the ice, a sincere, unprompted apology from the one person whose opinion, I realized, truly mattered to me. It was a bridge back, not to the family that had discarded me, but to a future relationship that could be built on truth. I let Leo's message sit for a full day. I didn't want to respond with raw emotion. I wanted to reply with the same thoughtfulness and honesty he had shown me. I walked through the park, sat on my terrace, and thought about the woman I was now, not the woman I had been. My response had to reflect her, calm, boundaried, but full of love. The next afternoon, I sat down and typed out my reply. "Dearest Leo, thank you so much for your message. Getting it meant more to me than I can possibly say. Reading your words, I felt a part of my heart, which I thought had gone cold, warm up again. I am so proud of the insightful and compassionate young man you are becoming. It takes great courage and character to see things clearly, especially when it's your own family. You don't need to apologize for the actions of others. None of what happened was your fault. I miss you too, very much. I miss our talks about history and the funny way you used to wrinkle your nose when a photo was slightly out of focus. I have held on to those good memories, and they are precious to me. Your father and your grandmother made their choices. I have made mine. My life is very different now, Leo. It's quieter, smaller in some ways, but it's also more genuine. It's a life that belongs to me. I am studying architecture. I'm traveling to places that feed my soul, and I am finding happiness in my own way. I am happy. The door to my life is always, always open to you. It's a different door, leading to a different house, but you are more welcome here than I can express. There are no expectations and no obligations. If you ever want to visit me in the city, see my new home, and maybe even critique my amateur architectural drawings, I would love that more than anything. We can build something new, just for us. Be well in your studies, be kind to yourself, and know that you are loved, your Grandma Kate. Pressing send felt like the final definitive act of closing one chapter and beginning another. It wasn't about forgiveness for the others. It was about acknowledging that my capacity for love hadn't been extinguished by their betrayal. It had simply been redirected. My future was no longer defined by what I had lost, but by what I was actively building. My identity wasn't tied to a name, a house, or a bank account. It was forged in my resilience, my passions, and my choice to live authentically. I was free. And for the first time in a very long time, I knew with absolute certainty that the best was yet to come. Has a moment of betrayal ever led you to a path of rediscovery? The end of one story is often the beginning of a much better one. Share your story of reclaiming your power in the comments below. And if you love stories about strong women finding their voice and their freedom, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new chapter.